Historically, the USSR and the USA represented two different ideologies and views on the development of society. The collapse of the Soviet Union allowed the United States to influence political, economic and cultural processes around the world, creating conditions for the enrichment of multinational corporations. However, in recent years, more and more people are interested in creating a new formation based on a socially oriented economy and striving for a just society. Before the Socialist Revolution of 1917, collectivism and the priority of spiritual values over material wealth were widespread in Russia. Relations between peasants and landlords were regulated by social norms, not economic benefits. The landlords received most of the harvest in return for leasing the land to the peasants, who, in turn, shared the surplus products with the landlords. At that time, a peasant reform took place in Germany, which consolidated the legal relations between employees and owners of land plots. Reforms in Germany led to the conclusion of employment contracts, which prescribed working conditions and remuneration. These rules were strictly observed in order to avoid the ruin of workers and landowners. In Russia, an attempt to introduce such relations led to the Reform of 1861, which abolished serfdom and introduced elements of Western capitalism. However, the landlords delayed the process of capitalist development, preserving the old order in the rural environment. It was planned that peasants would work in industry, and agricultural workers would receive legal protection. The goal of the reforms was to control the entire industry and agriculture of Russia and develop within the framework of the capitalist system on the European model. The Russian authorities used their reserves and attracted French capital for the development of industrial production. They were able to make some progress, but these achievements turned out to be superficial and did not significantly improve the standard of living of the majority of the population. Russia lagged behind Europe in the production of goods per capita and the introduction of advanced technologies. Russia was dependent on France and had a large external debt. In turn, the European powers used Russia to their advantage, involving it in military alliances to fight their opponents. The Russian Republic was formed after the overthrow of the monarchy and the collapse of the Russian Empire. Despite the fact that it was based on capitalist principles, the majority of the country's population did not fully support this system. As a result, the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic emerged, which sought to build a more just society. Her ideas and example influenced the growth of socialist and international ideas all over the world. Subsequently, the USSR became the first socialist state based on communist ideology. In the USSR, the nationalization of property, the industrialization of industry and the collectivization of agriculture were carried out. By 1938, the USSR had become a leading industrial and agrarian country, second only to the United States in terms of industrial production. However, the level of well-being of the Soviet population was lower than in Western capitalist countries, which at that time were colonial powers and exploited their colonies. Multinational companies have played an important role in achieving high rates of economic growth in capitalist countries. They put their profits as a priority and were not interested in resolving interstate crises. Large companies could help different sides of conflicts at the same time. For example, the American corporation General Motors owned the German company Opel, which produced armored vehicles for Nazi Germany. Propaganda based on universal ideas contributed to the growth of pro-Soviet movements around the world. However, after the collapse of the USSR, the transition to capitalism began in Russia. The Russian authorities, consulting with American consultants, hoped to easily make this transition and integrate into the capitalist space. However, in reality, most of the people's assets were seized as part of this transition. In the 20th century, about 100 states declared independence, including the republics of the USSR and colonies of Western countries in Africa, South Asia and the Asia-Pacific region. The colonial form of government was replaced by pseudo-independent states. With the development of capitalism, corporations began to control the output of most of the world's products, and hundreds of countries depend on corporate decisions. During the collapse of the USSR, Western strategists hoped to use the rich resources of Siberia and the Far East to expand the global influence of multinational companies. The Russian authorities tried to integrate into the capitalist system, but relations with Western countries were reduced to the role of a supplier of raw materials. Therefore, Russia announced a revision of relations and a reorientation to the markets of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa. Russia carried out analytical work and was able to form a stable political system, consolidate its authority in certain regions and ensure macroeconomic stability and financial independence of the country. Currently, conditions for full import substitution have been created in the Russian Federation, and sanctions stimulate local producers and competition in the Russian market. In China in 1978, Deng Xiaoping proposed a strategy for introducing elements of capitalism into the socialist system. Starting with the land reform, which gave the peasants the right to organize production based on traditional crafts. The authorities gave enterprises broad powers in the second half of the 1980s, allowing manufacturers to focus on the market and introduce innovative ideas. China has begun to compete with leading countries in the production of high-tech goods. The positive experience of China shows that the socialist system can be successfully combined with elements of capitalism, contributing to development and having positive dynamics of real GDP growth, even in times of crisis. Vietnam has implemented reforms inspired by China, which were aimed at weakening state control and expanding foreign relations, attracting foreign investment. This has led to regular economic growth and improved welfare of the population. In the DPRK, the first leaders adhered to the ideology of Juche, but with the coming of Kim Jong-un to power, market reforms were carried out following the example of China, which led to the rapid development of the private sector and the need for foreign investment. However, due to the sanctions policy of the collective West, not all countries are considering investing in DPRK projects. Cuba in the 20th century was one of the most developed countries in Latin America. She has implemented many social reforms, including the introduction of an 8-hour working day, the establishment of a minimum wage and the creation of a highly developed medical system. After the establishment of socialism on the island, social guarantees continued to expand thanks to the nationalization of industrial enterprises and economic assistance from the USSR. However, after the collapse of the USSR, Cuba's foreign debt began to grow rapidly. There is a strict sanctions policy against Cuba, but this has led to the formation of a request for the renewal of the political system, greater integration with capitalist countries and an increase in living standards. The Cuban government has allowed private entrepreneurship and introduced the right to private property. Special economic zones have also been created, where foreign companies are exempt from taxes in the first 10 years of operation. In order to achieve productive relations between countries, it is necessary to transform the main state systems. China's experience shows that the construction of classical socialism is now impossible, so socialist countries must transform their state systems in order to achieve economic success and the expansion of the middle class. The transformation into a socialist political system can help Russia take a leading position in the anti-colonial struggle and increase its credibility on the world stage. The USA relies on the capitalist model of the economy, but can study the experience of socialist transformations in the countries of the East and Asia. This does not mean the adoption of socialist ideology, but the analysis of the successful experience of these countries can make a valuable contribution to the revision of some economic procedures and policies. For example, public investment in education and health, sustainable social structural networks, or a close relationship between government and industry are elements that can be adapted and integrated into strengthening their own economic policy. But it is important not to forget that any modifications must respect traditional values and the socio-economic context of the United States.